Hello. I'm going to try and make a little video about circular questioning. It's one of the things that you really need to know, and I thought the video would be more appropriate because you can read about it in maybe your book or the journal articles and some of the resources I post, but you don't necessarily see it in action. And so I think it's a really critical skill and one we should just talk about. So I'm not going to go into great detail about every possible scenario or circular question that's out there. That would be impossible to do. But I do want to just engage with this for a little bit and talk a little bit about what it might look like in an actual office, right? Because in some form or fashion, you're going to have to take these theories and you're going to have to enter into your counseling office and then do them. So, really want to talk more about the skill of this and some of the importance of it. So, what I've drawn here is an office, but in the center, I wanted to just give you a real quick background. So, small genogram. Um, so, in this case, you probably know because you studied your genograms. That you've got a husband and a wife. They're separated. The one line, not two, one separated. Two would be divorced. He's dealing with some A&D issues. They have a daughter who's 14, a son who's 10. He's the identified client. We've got some difficult relationships between the daughter and mother, and obviously between the husband and the wife. You have this idea, this hypothesis that there's something else that's going on. Just from the initial intake, those initial phone calls where you say, "Hey, this is who I am. How can I help you?" Well, dad calls in. I want to set up an appointment for myself and my wife. We're separated. She's always busy doing stuff and really not helping me with our son, who's really getting into a lot of trouble and having a real hard time right now because his mom's always gone. Okay, let's set up a time. And you do. You set up a time and you have your initial session. Now, this walks in your office in hypothetical office. Um, they come in, and here you are, the therapist. And again, typically when you have a husband and wife who are not doing well, they're going to sit on the opposite ends here. So mom's on one side, dad's on the other. Kids end up sitting somewhere in the middle on like a couch or something of that nature. What do you do then? I mean, we can talk about systems theories. We can talk about, what it might look like to conceptualize something, but circular questioning is a skill that will actually help you in this situation. And I kind of want to draw it out a little bit just so that you can see some of the patterns. Let's talk a little bit about the theory. I'll share my screen in a PowerPoint really quickly. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how to make this come to life. So the purpose of circularity or circular questioning, what you're really attempting to do is help a system understand itself, its relationships, some of its ideas, beliefs, behaviors from a systemic point of view, really bringing to light information that they really weren't aware of, or maybe they were aware of it, but it just really wasn't communicated or communicated in a healthy way. It's really great for you as a therapist because it will very quickly help you gain the information that you need to figure out really what's going on. And it'll really make your case conceptualizations just so much better, and your rapport with the families and the couples that you work with will be exponentially better. Promise. You know, you've got those closed-in questions that we try and avoid unless necessary, like, are you happy? Well, no. Are you sad? Well, yes. Okay. How sad are you? Very. Uh, you know, so some of those can be a struggle. We try and ask more open-ended. Help me understand what happiness or sadness might look like for you. Okay, well, now we're talking. Circular questioning is like the next level above that, where you're saying um, a question, but you're doing it so that they will relate one to another, some kind of connection or some kind of way that informs everyone of really what's going on. Let's keep moving here. Some things to remember, some keys, some guidelines of this intervention. Think relational. Think in terms of where you're relating ideas, beliefs, behaviors, situations, one to another, maybe connections across time, um, differing emotions. You're always trying to relate different things one to another and understand the interaction between each one. You don't spend an inordinate amount of time with any one person. This is a hallmark of quality family and couple therapy. Your goal is to spend equal amounts of time with each individual so that there really doesn't seem like there's an allegiance going on. Now, you're going to read in some of your theories that some family therapists will only have the session if every single person in the family is present. And some people still do that today. I had a very, very wise professor once tell me, well, I think she's wise. Jason, you may not be able to have everybody in the room all the time, but make sure you've got the right people in the room. And what she meant by that is for what needs to occur in that session, make sure that you've got the tools, they've got the individuals within their system present to process, to do, to engage, to take that next step in therapy. All right. So we're not making allegiances. We're the whole family is the client, although we do have identified clients because of insurance and billing and other things of that nature. We're talking about what's relevant to the problem or to your hypothesis as to what might be at the genesis of what's going on. If you hear any patterns, again, systemics, we watch for patterns. Try and use those in some of your phrases. So if they're taking on and saying certain phrases, use those phrases. It's a way of what's called mimicry, and it helps you integrate it by using similar language. It can really help you almost bond and increase that therapeutic alliance with the whole family a little faster. If there's something sensitive, try and say or ask questions in a way that is less, well, let's just say more positive. So here's an example. Who was the first to believe that there was something wrong with Samuel becomes who believes that nothing is wrong with him, right? And so it's kind of like a strengths-based way of approaching, but that's not necessarily, you're just trying to do it in a more sensitive way. I like to stay positive. So a full circular view. When we're talking about circular questioning, what you're trying to do is using everyone in the room, because you're wanting the full perspective. You want to see all points of view. When you get down to it and you get that full circular view of something, that's kind of when it's complete. You've found those missing links. Let's keep going. So I'm just going to kind of read through these, and you can go back and study them and kind of get the idea. And I'll provide some articles that'll give you a ton of examples, which will really clarify a lot of this. Creating differences. Again, remember we're talking about relationships. So how are we creating differences between the two things? You can do that across time, like when did the problem begin? Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this one because I think it's a very important one. Oftentimes you can like go back in time. So instead of saying like, when did the problem begin? They say about a year ago. You go back a little bit further and you say, well, what happened before that? And when you do that, oftentimes problems begin long before people actually notice that there's a problem. They kind of creep up, and then there's that threshold effect. When it gets so severe, people go, oh wait, no, something's wrong. Well, it didn't happen just then, not when you first notice it. Typically there's a history of things building up to create that first real moment of clarity that there is something wrong. So go back in time and then say, and how did things change from then until the next time period? And from then until then, and until now? And then treatment planning. And from this point, how would you like to see them change in maybe the next 6 weeks or 6 months or a year? So across time, creating differences, it's a great way of really understanding the genesis of an issue, but also really kind of grasping hold of what that hope is that your client might have. Between people, so here's a great example of making things a little bit more positive. This example question, who is the most argumentative in the family? Who would be the next most argumentative? Might change to who is the most agreeable in the family? Who is the next most agreeable in the family? Between parts of a person. We talked a little bit about this when we discussed genograms and mapping. You know, different people have different sides. So this question is, your dad's tender or gruff side easier for you to see? Well, when you ask someone, they're looking at two different things, a tender or a gruff side, two different parts of a person. And if they say, I don't really see the tender side too often, I see mostly gruff, well, even by saying that they don't see it too often, or maybe I never see the tender side, it's still, you're saying, hey, I think that your dad has a tender side. And then you're able to go back and talk more about situations in which that could be more present. Again, we're still creating differences between situations. When you're more likely to be talkative at home or out with friends. Behaviors, we've changed a little bit here. So instead of creating differences, now we're creating connections. So this is how you can, again, another way of connecting, like what happened like over time. Feelings, what feeling came up for you when she calls you incompetent? And then how's that feeling changed over time? Beliefs, meaning. I think this area, drawing connections within meaning, can be so important and so therapeutic. It really gets into the idea of like hopes and dreams and ambitions and can really help couples with ideas of intimacy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the 7 levels of intimacy and Sternberg's model of love. Strong connections within relationships, and hopefully you will have the opportunity to go through some of the journal articles. I think there's 2 that I would like to try and post links to, or maybe I'll just post the article. They're pretty old. This idea has been around for a while, but I think it's also a hallmark of who we are as couples and family therapists. So now that you know a little bit about the theory, what does it really look like in here? Again, you're really trying to address everyone in the room, not making any allegiances, right? And so, it may start off with, remember our situation here where dad's dealing with some A&D issues, mom is somewhat distracted by something. We've got our problem behaviors that the son is doing, and then the daughter who's a little bit more aligned with the dad and somewhat argumentative with mom. And so it may start off with you asking a question of dad about the son, or maybe the daughter about the son, or the son about the mother. You're spreading it out so that, again, hopefully you can see this, you are continuing this you're making these connections, you're forcing interactions and bringing up information. It's an insight oriented way. As you bring up information, people know something. Once they know it, it's what are you going to do with it? How do you make meaning out of it? How do you be different once you know some of this information? And so let's talk a little bit about it. So maybe, just maybe, the son who is having problems with behaviors, maybe he's being a little mischievous, a little disobedient. And you have to remember that behaviors are communication, they have purpose and meaning. Now, I'll just say, so that you know, the son is getting into trouble because it forces mom and dad to talk to one another. Now, remember, dad is having A&D problems, mom is drifting away. So when the son misbehaves, it forces them back together to talk. So in a way, the system is still together because the son's maladaptive behaviors, getting into trouble at school and at home, actually serve a purpose. They're very meaningful to him because he believes that he's keeping mom and dad together. But not everybody knows this. Through circular questioning, you can begin to figure this out. So everybody comes in, you're talking, the son gets up, goes over to the toys and begins to like play in the toys. Not that this would ever happen. The mom sees what's going on and says, hey, you didn't ask. You should go sit back down. And we're here for, the therapist to help us. And you can't really listen and participate. You're playing with toys. Well, he just got in trouble. Dad goes, well, I think that he could probably talk and, maybe play with the toy at the same time. I think it's us talking more than him. We're here to try and figure out how to help him. Well, mom responds to dad, what are you going to do? What's being communicated here? Like, think about it. Just stop and kind of think about it for a second. What's really being communicated here? you see a pattern, um, and we're still kind of wondering, what's that other thing that's really distracting mom? We don't know. We have a hypothesis, but we've got the son who's the identified client. The therapist may say, so dad, when you see your son and your wife arguing, what feelings come up towards each of them? Okay, so we just asked something to try and garner a connection about a situation. And then you can say, do you always feel that? Or how does one situation vary to another? The son, when your mom corrects your behavior, um, what do you think your sister believes about the situation? Because we don't want to leave her out. Oftentimes, the one who attempts to be the quietest has the most information because they're the one who's sitting and watching everything play out. So I always really want to pull into therapy those individuals who are the quietest. And again, it goes back to how this is such a powerful therapeutic technique and mode of therapy because you're engaging the whole system through these questions of connections and and so think as you're sitting here, what what other aspects you might see, like the fact that mom and dad are sitting completely apart, where typically they might sit on the love seat or the sofa that you might have, and the kids would sit in two different areas. What does it mean, even when they organize themselves in certain seating arrangements? So you may say, hey, what would it be like if mom and dad sat next to each other and you and your sister sit in the individual chairs? You don't have to do that right now, but just what would that be like? What would it feel like? So, what are you feeling now? And then, if they did do that change, what would you feel then? And so now we're looking at differences between situations. And that's really, you're watching and just feeding off that information, and it will tell you so much. The information that you get will be so rich. But it is a skill. And what I will say is it takes some practice. It's just not the easiest thing to do the first time, or maybe not even the second. So practice a little bit, begin to ask somewhat circular questions. I'm not asking you to be a therapist for a family member or anyone else. That's not it. This is not a clinical intervention that you're going to do for your tape. But begin to think and really embrace that idea of a system, of a relationship, and how different people, different situations, maybe even across time, how different things change and what that relationship might be like. Hopefully, this was a little helpful to bring it to life in some way. This is really where all your theory is going to play out in a therapeutic context, where you are sitting, looking at dad, and then turning over and talking to mom, and goodness, I'll tell you, I've never figured out how people have those big stable chairs and really engage people, because our body language says so much. So when we point towards someone and begin to talk to them, it feels more engaging. And so, how are you engaging everybody in the room, and then enabling them to engage one another back and forth? Because that's really where that rich information is going to come from. That's going to help you understand people and the systems that they function within in a more dynamic way. So again, hope this was helpful. If you've got any questions about it, happy to help, and I will let you go.